Hey everyone, I hope you had a great weekend. It's Sunday night and I'm doing an Instagram live. Go figure. Hi everyone. I don't even know if anybody's around. Hopefully you all are relaxing. But I was surprised by this. Hi everyone. I was surprised by this piece by my friend Jeremy Faust, who is a uh, Faust. I just said Jeremy's name wrong. Sorry, Jeremy. Jeremy is an ER doc, and he's got a newsletter. And he wrote it. We'll tell you more about his newsletter. But the CDC, a lot of things have been washed from the CDC website. Hi, everyone. Hi, guys. Um, Gosh. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. This is going to be sort of an important conversation about public health and censoring things and removing all kinds of references from the CDC website. So let me just see if Jeremy is here. Hey, Jeremy. So listen, I wanted to let everyone know what is happening at the CDC because I think it's super important and public health is something you care deeply
Yes.
about. He is, Jeremy, you guys, is an ER physician and a public health expert. He has been writing a lot about public health on his Substack called Inside Medicine, which I highly recommend. And over the weekend, he wrote in a piece. Oh, Adriana says my chin isn't in the shot. I do apologize, everyone. Anyway, you wrote in a piece, censorship apparently is the mechanism of choice in this administration. Even if you believe President Trump's election was a mandate to rethink or tone down DEI and LGBTQ plus issues in the public discourse, there's absolutely no reason for your government to shut down cdc.data.gov as it did on Friday. They even removed the CDC's vaccine recommendations en masse. So, Jeremy, what the hell is going on here, very simply?
Well, it's good to be back with you, Katie. And everyone I know is just focused and determined right now with this crisis, just like we would be if it was a virus or a pandemic. All the public health people are just stepping up to do what they can. And what's going on is that there's really a pretty sustained attack on United States resources in our public health infrastructure that I think, take for granted. They're in the background. They're things we don't think about and how lucky we are in that way. And so it's moments like these where they're taken away and they're put back kind of arbitrarily and without warning that make you stop and really think about how lucky we are and how lucky we've been.
Right. And Jeremy, I certainly agree with you, but what exactly has been done? Was it just the CDC website? Can you just tell us in simple terms
Hmm.
what happened on Friday in terms of this
Hmm.
data website,
Yep.
cdc.data.gov?
So it was an escalation of stuff that had happened earlier in the week. First, there was a comms blackout, meaning the CDC could not publish its medical journals, which they do every week.
Right,
Then
the morbidity and
mortality.
mortality
Right.
report that has been published every week for 40
Yeah,
years
at
had to stop.
least. Yeah, exactly. And look, this is a very important journal that gets important information out to public health officials, to the public. I've published there, and it's a very stringent process, and it's just gone, and we don't know when it'll come back. So that had happened earlier. Other things at the CDC had been censored in this comms gag order, things like the weekly statistical reports on how many people died, maternal mortality, and opioids, and other reports that we just get constantly. And we were told that will be temporary. And then on Friday, there was just this massive escalation, this huge blackout of data in the public health space, where dozens, and I think the Wall Street Journal said a thousand websites that have data and public health information just went dark without any kind of explanation. And some of them have come back and scrubbed of certain terms, and others remain offline. And what scared a lot of us was just that they could do that. And and we could talk about what those
Yeah,
websites contain.
well,
And
let's
yeah,
talk about that. Are they all under the auspices of the Centers for Disease Control, or are they various public health websites?
the one the answer is various public health websites were affected. The Department of Health and Human Services has data that was taken offline. and there were other government websites that have data. But the biggest kind of incredible sort of tidal wave of censorship was at the CDC.
And let's talk about the things that were censored because
Mhm.
you outline it in your Substack. And are they all connected ostensibly or somewhat to DEI issues? Like a lot of LGBTQ stuff was anything having to do with gender, pregnant women versus. I mean, tell us
Mhm.
about the terms that suddenly evaporated from these websites.
So first of all, I just want to say that the breadth of the censorship that occurred on Friday was much wider than that. It was a complete blackout of certain resources that have to do with things like where is COVID? How many influenza hospitalizations are there? How much RSV is there? Is there norovirus? How many emergency department visits in the country are these things? So it wasn't just
And
these
their information about vaccines too were
correct.
scrubbed, right?
Correct. So there was, yes, there was information such as, which I wouldn't call this one emergency. Like they got rid of a website that tells us how many people have been vaccinated this year against various pathogens. Like I wouldn't call that, emergency information, although it's kind of like, why would you take that away? Um, but literally the CDC's advisory panel on all pediatric vaccinations, the vaccine schedule that we take our kids to go get protected against measles, mumps, flu, rubella, all the things that they get vaccinated against, that was gone. It's back on, I think. I think so. I'm not sure. But yeah, it wasn't just narrow to these quote unquote political hot button issues. It was everything, and a lot of it's back. But it's just really scary that that would happen.
Now, so have you, first of all, was there any explanation from any sort of government entity what was going on and why this was being done?
So at first, everything was just gone. It was just broken links, and there was no explanation. Some websites have since been updated that are still offline. That will say this website is currently offline until it comports, agrees with. It's been essentially there's some language that basically acknowledges until offensive language essentially has been removed from it, as if it had been vandalized or as if there was f-bombs on it or something. But apparently. Gender or transgender or anything like that is considered offensive or not up to the standards of this administration. So there's been some explanation on the websites that are still down, and there was some sort of understanding going into that blackout, which really again Friday afternoon just was like a bomb went off. But it was basically the understanding was so that they could make sure that all these websites, whether it was related to COVID, flu, or HIV and trans issues or something, didn't matter, were in alignment with the government's view of what's okay to talk about. So that was the stated reason, but it didn't make sense because why would you take down, census data? Literally, the census was down for a while.
Really weird. What were people in the public health sphere saying? I mean, a ton of doctors and
Yeah.
a ton of researchers and scientists. They must have been scratching their heads, or more than that, they must have been really upset about this. And tell us what some people
Hmm.
that were saying.
Yeah. There was a couple of different reactions. One was very practical. One was, is the website that I need for the research that I do or for the thing that I track, is that live? And so that was, people were just scrambling to try to find that out. And if they were live, there was a lot of archiving going on. Oh, this is going to go down soon, so I should try to scrape as much data as I can, so at least there's something left over. So there was a little bit of just a collective call to archive, and that was very practical. Then there was just the sort of raw emotional reaction, like, what the hell is happening here? This is not the government public health that we grew up with. Why would they do this? The idea that some of these resources would be offline was just absolutely shocking and just kind of bizarre. Like, what is so offensive about some of these things? What are they so afraid of? So the vibe was a little bit of was just confusion, anger, and some fear, which I think is probably the point.
And no kind of of warning to these scientists, physicians, anybody within the CDC or these public health websites that they were going to do this. In other words, they could have said, hey, you need to review your website. These are the parameters we'd like you to refer to things. Instead, they just kind of took it, on
Yeah.
upon themselves to scrub them.
So it, I think that's a great question. It happened in different phases. If I can describe some conversations I've had with people who work at the CDC. And I think that within the CDC last week, there was some of what you described. There were memos going out, and I'm looking at my notes here from a conversation I had with a colleague. It said, you need to purge all of your communications, your notes, anything that's public, anything that could be with our partners, of all these terms, and you need to do it by a certain time. And it was just absolutely impossible because literally the word gender couldn't appear. And you could have a spreadsheet that has 50 columns, age, location of person, zip code of the population or the person that, and then, gender, sex, gender, and like just in a column somewhere. And they were like, oh gosh, if I don't get rid of that, I'm going to get fired. And so they didn't know what to do. And so a lot of people at CDC were really panicked that it was so broad that they didn't know what it applied to. And so I don't know if that's why eventually CDC just said, F it, we'll just take everything down and put it back as we see fit. But so there was some kind of warning internally at CDC. And then on Friday, we heard rumors of a mass blackout kind of coming. But I've learned that rumors are rumors, as you know. You always have to take these things with a grain of salt until they happen, or until you have really good sourcing.
I also was read that, as you wrote in your piece, that scientists and researchers have been instructed to pause the publication of any kind of research manuscript that's being considered by a medical or scientific journal because they basically want to read and make sure that that is in compliance, whatever these standards are in terms of not mentioning gender, DEI
Correct.
issues or gay issues or, gay terms even.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people had to just stop working, or
Mm-hmm.
these scientific journals like JAMA and Lancet and Nature would not be able to green light any of these pieces for now until they're reviewed by the government.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So first, the CDC shuttered its own publications, right? The MMWR, which we mentioned, and they have two other main periodicals that come out. Those were censored and cloistered off, and we don't know when they're going to come back. And then there was this real expansion, which I reported on in my newsletter, which was saying what you just said, which was that CDC scientists, they often say, hey, we're not just going to publish in our journal. We're going to go to the top journals in the world as well, which are our peer journals. And sometimes those will be collaborations with people like me. So I've had those collaborations. And so it might be a lot of work that went into something. And then the way it works is if that piece has been submitted, let's just use an example to JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it has been sent back for revisions, which means it's really being considered, it might be published, or even if it's been accepted and is now just literally in press, like it would be live if it weren't just in the queue. And someone's got to they've got to lay it out and mix and copy edit it and make everything look perfect. Those pieces have to be retracted and paused and scrubbed of any offensive language, even if they have absolutely nothing to do with something that this administration would call controversial.
So a lot of my followers wanted to know, well, gosh, there are a few questions, and I'm going to try to get the ones in the question section too. But why are they doing this in your view? Is this just sort of, we've heard, and I talked to Peter Baker of the Times on Friday night, that they are coming after DEI with a vengeance, and that's really an understatement. But it's really to wipe the slate clean of what I guess Donald Trump and people in his administration believe are woke policies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, DEI, loosely translated to Donald Trump is woke ideology. So is this sort of a continuation for that, of that? And what about some of the other scientific material that really has no connection with it?
So I think that the stated intention is that they want to get rid of, this is their own words, woke ideology, which I don't know how you define that, by the way. I'm not a lawyer, but how do you define woke ideology? So that's going to be really interesting. And because it's so vague, people, of course, are erring on on the safe side of just taking everything out because they don't want to get fired. So that's the stated intention. But I would just point out that there is really important information that has nothing to do with wokeism, that would be affected here. So I'll give you like a really, really good example. Mpox, monkeypox, what we now call Mpox, is something that we have vaccines for, but not many. There's not a lot of supply.
Hmm.
And so to know who is at risk, you want to know something about the demographics. And if you just say, oh, well, this is a population where people in the LGBT population, that's not good enough. There are just way too many people in that group, right? It's just a huge number of people in that group. And so in fact, if you're trying to figure out where to actually use limited number of Mpox tests, limited number of Mpox vaccines and treatments, you really want to boil it down to the population who actually is at high risk. And that will be transgender people in some cases, that will be sex workers, that will be non-binary. So these are things that will help clinicians like me know how to treat the patient in front of me. So it's not
Hmm.
advancing any ideology to look, you can say, oh, someone who's trans isn't, they're just whatever they were at birth. Okay, I don't happen to subscribe to that belief, but even if you feel that way, I can tell you that person over there who identifies as trans, but everything that comes with that tells me I have to think about their medical situation differently,
Hmm.
and I should, and that's really important. And so what I think is crazy here is that it's not. I think the administration imagines that they are dismantling some ideology and some way of thinking, but as a public health worker, as a physician on the front line, what they're doing is they're making it harder for me to be a good doctor, and that's what I think is so chilling here.
Other people wanted to know where could they go for accurate, valid information if some of these websites, Jeremy, are shut down, and people need information. What do they do?
hmm It's a great question. So first of all, a lot of them are back live, and that's great, but it's very chilling that they can be held hostage at any time. I think that was a big lesson from Friday. Um, there was a big effort to archive things, and there are some resources out there, which I could just sort of look through later and help your readers find. But for example, someone put on one of the social media sites, well, I see that your vaccine recommendation schedules are down. If someone hasn't archived them, here's the Canadian one. And we do things differently, actually, and the Europeans do things differently than we do, and we can argue about that all day long, but at least it would be broad strokes, similar in a lot of things. So a lot of archiving is going on. I think
Hmm.
this was a wake-up call for us that we have to set up redundancies so that if this happens again, clinicians actually have a place to go.
Well,
Um,
can there
but
be an alternative website that's not under the government, or that people like you can put together and it can be vetted, et cetera? I don't know.
That's been discussed. I mean, that's something that some colleagues and I have been discussing for a long time, and this is lighting the fire under us for that, for sure. I would just say two things about that. Number one, in phase one of that, we still ourselves would be relying on the government for the raw information. So, for example, they take down the COVID wastewater data, which is telling us where COVID levels are high all over the country. I have a dashboard that I curate with a colleague that we think nicely shows that. But if the CDC cuts off the data, we've got nothing. So right now, we rely on the CDC, even if we're doing it externally. Now,
Right.
we can archive and archive and archive so that at least we can have stuff going back, and that's happening.
Yeah.
Going forward, I think there's a discussion about redundancies in systems, and that's going to take time to build up. And I can tell you, Katie, that I'm talking to some colleagues who I really trust and really admire, who are working on that so that this doesn't happen in the future. I will say, though, that it's a dark day that we have to do that.
I was going to say, I mean, this is what the CDC is supposed to be doing.
And if we do that and we're good at it, in a way, I feel like, oh, we've proven their point. Like, we don't need the government to do that. And the answer is actually, we should, because they have the resources that, we don't
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a scramble and in the short term, and in the long term, a real reckoning about to make sure this doesn't happen again. But at the same time, um, the CDC data is important, and it's actionable, and what they do saves lives in ways that we don't always think about. I mean, look, we didn't even talk about the fact that we withdrew from the WHO and the World Health Organization and what that means. This is not just a hypothetical. We're not going to know what to put in the flu shot next year.
Yeah. It's pretty scary stuff. And well, I'm going to look at some of the questions. And as I do, two more questions, then I'll let you go on this Sunday night. Thank you for doing this.
Always.
One is, what is going on with the USAID? Suddenly they've frozen all the funds. And can you tell our viewers slash listeners what the USAID does, Jeremy?
Yeah, the USAID is the federal government's foreign aid agency. It's independent up until now, meaning it's not like the CDC. It's its own thing. And within USAID, there is a lot of work on global health. And so, for example, our global fight against HIV, which is called PEPFAR, um, USAID administers that program. That program, and I just want people to hear this number. That program has saved 25 million lives since George W. Bush enacted it. George W. Bush. And I will just say, when this happened, I was still like kind of like in school and stuff.
Right.
But people on like the liberal side were like, wait, what? He did he really? They were shocked that this came from the Bush administration. But the real activists had to say, wow, this looks real. And then and over the next 10, 20 years, millions of lives by us giving HIV medications to countries that wouldn't have them. Look, if a woman is pregnant, or a person, I don't care what you call them, is pregnant with HIV/AIDS, and they take medications, their
Hmm.
baby will be born HIV free. Okay, we have
Right.
caused that to happen for 5 million people. And so USAID getting told they can't do their work, stop that immediately. Now there's been a little bit of, oh, well, actually they can give out the drugs, but it turns out that so many people have been paused in their work that it's unclear if it's actually happening. So USAID is our soft power. It tells the world we are here for good, and we help people. We save lives, whether it's eradicating smallpox, or whether it's working on polio or HIV. And it's just a tragedy that that organization has seen huge cuts in their leadership, just absolutely crazy administrative like terminations happening in the past week, and it's a tragedy. I don't see how we're going to recover our reputation abroad.
And finally, I think well, somebody wanted to know about Elon Musk having access to our government payment system. I think that's probably not Jeremy's area of expertise, but that came out over the weekend too, which is pretty scary, which is supposed to be the same for each administration, and now he somehow has got access to how government pays its bills and where they pay them. But I'm not going to ask Jeremy about that, you guys. I'll try to do something on that this week.
But I have one.
And
But I'll say one thing about a related issue here,
yeah.
that I can speak to, and that is that this administration is doing something that we should not be okay with, which is that it is putting an enormous amount of power in a few hands, and they're not being shy. They're saying, for example, at CDC, anything that goes out has to be approved by a political appointee of this administration. They're not being shy about that. They're saying it has to be a Trump appointee. At the CDC, that's one person, and her secretary, literally. So Elon Musk, for example, has all this power. Well, look, all these people, like, I've been watching Elon Musk and people like him on social media for a long time. They think they can do a Google search and tell me how to treat COVID. And they thought the hydroxychloroquine was going to save COVID. And I wish it were true, but it wasn't. And so these people, they have they have this thing like, often wrong, never in doubt. Right?
Hmm.
They think that they know everything after 2 seconds, and they're wrong. And when it comes to health and medicine, the expertise that our great nation has is just being ignored and replaced by a few people. And so my even though I can't speak to the treasury part of what's happening there, I can say that people like that are being given the keys to the car here, and Meanwhile, my friends and my colleagues at the CDC who just want to keep you alive are being told, you better do what we say or you're going to be fired.
Yeah, and I know, and a lot of other people are asking, what can be done about this? I
Mhm,
think a
mhm.
lot of people feel powerless. They feel like the Democratic Party doesn't have enough power right now, and they, are trying, I guess, as best they can. But what can the average citizen do anything about this when they see? I mean, the news is so hard to keep up with, as you know, but when they see transgressions along these lines, what kind of options do they have?
Look, every one of us is going to have to make choices about how we use our clout, okay? And I don't know, the answer is different for every single person. And what I would just say is there's a person at USAID named Nicholas Gottlieb who gave me inspiration this week. And what Nicholas Gottlieb did gives me an idea of how I'm going to conduct myself in the next few years. Nicholas Gottlieb was told to put a bunch of people at USAID on administrative leave because they apparently didn't do something right. He studied that and said, I'm sorry, they didn't do anything wrong. I'm not doing that. And he knew that would get him fired. And he was fired. And you know what? Nicholas Gottlieb did a good thing because
And
we have to
wasn't he
stand up.
a Trump? Didn't the Trump administration put him in, or am I wrong about that?
That may be. I don't know. But my point is that we need to stand up for what's right. That's number one. Another thing I would say is this. There are a lot of people out there who worked in Trump 1. They worked out there. They worked in the Trump administration in the first time around. And a lot of them have been, kind of kicked out and, they didn't have much, well, they lasted a Scaramucci or whatever you call it. But those people, they have connections and they have influence in different ways. And if you live in a red state or you know someone who worked in the Trump administration, you should talk to those people because there's going to be a time where influence can be had by advocacy. I am not the kind of person who picks up the phone and calls my senator, but I
But
did
you
it.
know what?
I did it
Can I?
last week.
Yeah, I did. I did a couple weeks ago as well. And by the way, people don't think it matters, but members of Congress actually listen. And I have the number memorized for the Capitol Hill switchboard from when I was a reporter in Washington. If you all want to write it down, it's 202-224-3121. You can ask for your member of Congress or your senator. Sometimes they have answering machines. You can ask for a real person and you can express your point of view. If enough people do that, actually, it can make a difference and it can sway people on Capitol Hill. It's a pretty, light lift. 202-224-3121 and make your feelings heard. And on that topic, before I let you go, what do you think is going to happen in terms of, just because you're an ER doctor and you've studied so many things, Jeremy, do you think that RFK Jr. is going to should be confirmed and will be confirmed?
Um, I'm not a political pundit. I don't know if it'll be confirmed. I do know that there are people who think it's possible to go either way, which is unusual. What I would say is that there were things in his confirmation hearing that tell me that his predecessors were more prepared than he was. Let's just put it that way. Okay. There was discussion of, as an ER doctor, there was discussion of a law called EMTALA, which is a central core law passed during the Reagan administration, and he didn't seem to know what it was. He seemed to not know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And then you get to positions that we all think about, like vaccines, and there's real questions about safety. I think that there's a question of preparedness, and there's the question of fund of knowledge and the way of looking at the world. I don't think we'll be well served if he's confirmed. If he's confirmed, I'll tell you right now, we'll do everything we possibly can to work with who's there because all I care about is saving lives and keeping Americans healthy. So I'll work with anybody. And I'll give you a quick example. There's this guy who is going to possibly run the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya. Jay and I have gotten into it. I mean, good God. I mean, he wrote a hit piece about me in the Wall Street Journal. Okay. But I don't know if maybe Jay had something to do with the USAID funding for HIV drugs coming back online last week. Possibly he was one of those people. And I said this in my newsletter. Jay, if it was you, I'll take you out for coffee. Like there are people out there who will do the right thing. And I hope that we have people who are a little bit more prepared than RFK, but we'll do everything we can to help everyone.
And you said vaccine safety, and I want to just make sure people don't misunderstand that you were not saying vaccines aren't safe. You
Oh,
were
no.
saying he has raised
Right.
issues about vaccine safety and then denied raising those issues during the confirmation hearings. But a lot of these things were on videotape. He said if he could go back, he wouldn't vaccinate his children. And there were a whole host of statements, I think, that were troubling to some people who believe that vaccines are essential
Yeah.
to public health.
And let me just say, I have a colleague at NYU. Her name is, I'm not there, but her name is Perry Klass, and she's a pediatrician and a journalist. And she wrote a wonderful book that really discussed the 20th century public health in pediatrics and how in the 20th century was the first time in history that children were expected to survive childhood. Like that was the expectation. That was an achievement that we did as a people, as a human race and as a country. And vaccines were at the core of that success. And if we turn away from that, we will be very, very sick as a population.
And I think it's interesting that Mitch McConnell, I was reminded the other day, and I interviewed him when he wrote a memoir that he survived polio as a young man. So I think that is going to be first and very front of mind for Mitch McConnell when he casts his vote whether to confirm RFK Jr. It'll be really interesting to see, but we really appreciate your commitment to public health, Jeremy, and all you do and all you do to help explain it to people in terms they can understand. So thank you on this Sunday night for taking some time. And
Of course,
now I'm going to
always.
go watch Severance, I think. Have you seen it? It's so weird.
I have not. I'm gonna go. You know, what I'm gonna do. No, everyone knows. They know how I vote. You know, I vote blue a lot. But I'm gonna go have dinner with a guy who's a Bush administration alum. You know, that's what I do. I try to like make connections and figure out how to work
No,
with people. So that's what I'm gonna do
that's
tonight. And then but we're gonna have a drink, so it's gonna be fun.
okay. That sounds fine. And I think the Republican Party is two different parties now. It'd be
Yeah.
interesting to hear how he feels about what's happened to the Republican Party and if he feels comfortable with this latest iteration under Donald Trump, or if
Mhm.
he's like Mitt Romney and John McCain and others who didn't feel that comfortable with the
Yeah.
direction that the MAGA folks are taking it.
Yeah.
But well, I commend you for doing that. Have a good time and
Thank you.
have a drink for me. And thank you all. And have a great week, everyone. And I'll be back when news happens, which will be probably tomorrow morning.
You don't stop. Thank you, Katie.
Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.
Bye.